Right now, you have a to-do list. Maybe it's in your phone. Maybe it's in your head. Maybe it's a pile of guilt sitting quietly on your kitchen counter. And somewhere in the middle of that list, between the emails and the meetings and the grocery run, you've probably wondered, is this really what life is supposed to feel like? Here's what's strange. You are descended from people who had none of that. No inbox, no commute, no performance review. And yet the word we use for their existence is survival. As if every single moment was a desperate scramble between the jaws of something larger and faster and angrier than them. But the real answer is far stranger than that. Ancient humans, the ones who lived for hundreds of thousands of years before agriculture, before cities, before calendars, didn't spend most of their time running from predators. They weren't constantly hunting. They weren't perpetually freezing or starving or fighting. In fact, if you dropped your earliest ancestors into a single average day and watched what they actually did, you would not believe how familiar parts of it would look. And you would not believe how much they rested. Let's go back, not to some Hollywood version of prehistory with roaring mammoths and spear-throwing warriors. Back to the actual evidence. Anthropologist Marshall Sahlins called hunter-gatherer societies the original affluent society. Not because they were rich in material things, but because they were rich in time. His landmark 1966 paper, later expanded in his book Stone Age Economics, argued that hunter-gatherers typically truly worked, in terms of food acquisition somewhere between 3 and 5 hours per day. Not 8, not 10, 3 to 5. The rest of the day was theirs. That should stop you for a second. Your ancestors, the ones living in small nomadic bands across Africa, Europe, and Asia tens of thousands of years ago, were not grinding through 12-hour days of desperate labor. They were done with the functional business of staying alive by early afternoon. What happened after that is where things get genuinely interesting. They rested. A lot. Studies of contemporary hunter-gatherer groups like the Dot Kungsan of the Kalahari and the Hadza of Tanzania, two of the most carefully studied groups in anthropological history, show that adults in these societies spend a significant portion of each day in what researchers call low-intensity leisure. Sitting, talking, doing very little of measurable consequence. Not because they were lazy, because they were done. Anthropologist James Sussman, who spent decades living among the Dot Kungsan, documented this in striking detail in his 2017 book, Affluence Without Abundance. What he found overturned almost everything you think you know about early human life. The Dot Kungsan worked shorter weeks than almost anyone in the industrialized world. Their lives were not without hardship, but they were not relentlessly busy. Busyness, as it turns out, is a modern invention. So what were they doing in those long, unstructured hours? Talking. Constantly. Anthropologists who study hunter-gatherer groups consistently find that conversation is the dominant waking activity. And not strategic conversation, not planning sessions or logistical briefings. The talk was social. It was gossip in the oldest and most neutral sense of the word. Who said what to whom? Who behaved badly yesterday? Who was generous and who was quietly taking more than their share? Evolutionary psychologist Robin Dunbar has argued for decades that language itself evolved not to coordinate hunts or plan raids, but to manage social relationships, to serve as a form of grooming at scale. You could groom one primate at a time with your hands. You could process the social world with 3 people at once using words. Your brain didn't evolve to manage projects. It evolved to track people. And so your ancestors spent enormous portions of their day doing exactly what your brain still desperately wants to do, talking about other people. Processing social information. Trying to understand who was trustworthy and who wasn't. The drama wasn't a distraction from real life. The drama was life. But let's walk through the actual shape of a day. The morning typically began without urgency. People woke, often in a communal sleeping space. Groups slept close together for warmth and safety, and they would lie there. They'd listen, watch the light change, move slowly into wakefulness with no alarm pulling them upright. Then, depending on the season and the location, a smaller group would leave to gather food. Here's something that surprises almost everyone. In most hunter-gatherer societies, gathering the collection of plant foods, nuts, Tubers, fruits, insects, and eggs provided the majority of daily calories. Not hunting. Hunting was important, valued, celebrated, but it was also unreliable. Gathering was the stable foundation. A foraging trip might last 2 to 4 hours. You'd walk 5 to 8 kilometers at a relaxed pace, fill a bag or basket, return, and that was often enough. The hunters, when they went out, might be gone longer, sometimes all day, sometimes tracking across multiple days. But they didn't go out every day. And when they were successful, when they brought back a wildebeest, an antelope, a large animal, the food was shared immediately across the group in a kind of enforced generosity that prevented anyone from accumulating more than anyone else. Hoarding wasn't just socially frowned upon. In many groups, it was a social catastrophe that could get you excluded entirely. An exclusion, in deep prehistory, was effectively a death sentence. Think about your own relationship with food for a moment. Your hunger, your tendency to eat past fullness when food is abundantly available, your cravings for fat and sugar and salt, these are not character flaws. They are ancient adaptations built for a world where feasting and fasting alternated unpredictably. Your body was not designed for 3 scheduled meals and a sensible snack. It was designed for a world where the antelope showed up Tuesday and nothing showed up Thursday, and the hunger sat heavy in your chest until it didn't. Back to the day itself. Between the foraging and the eventual evening, there was time. Time for what we might call craft. Ancient humans made things. They knapped flint into tools, a process requiring enormous patience and a kind of meditative focus that modern neuroscientists have actually studied. The cognitive state required for tool-making resembles flow states documented in modern psychology, where attention narrows completely onto a single task and time loses its grip. They sewed hides. They wove grass. They decorated objects with ochre and carved bone. These were not purely functional activities. Many of the objects produced had no clear practical use. They were beautiful, or they were symbolic, or they were both. Your need to make things is ancient. Children moved through the day with a freedom that would alarm most modern parents. There were no structured lessons, no scheduled activities. Children played long, unstructured, self-directed, and through that play, they learned nearly everything they needed. They watched adults, mimicked, experimented. Studies of hunter-gatherer children by anthropologist David Lancy, compiled in his book, The Anthropology of Childhood, show that children in these societies are given levels of autonomy that seem reckless by contemporary standards. Toddlers handle knives. 7-year-olds build fires. And yet, catastrophic injury is not disproportionately common. Risk, real risk, was part of how children learned to navigate a real world. In the late afternoon, the group came back together. Food was shared, prepared, consumed, conversations resumed, arguments occasionally fled. Laughter happened probably more than you'd expect. There is consistent evidence across comparative anthropology and the accounts of researchers who first encountered isolated groups that humor was central to daily social life. Teasing, wit, the exaggerated retelling of a failed hunt. Ancient humans were funny, or at least they tried to be. And then there was the night. Your ancestors did not sleep the way you sleep. Sleep researcher Jerome Siegel and his team published a striking study in 2015 in the journal Current Biology after monitoring the actual sleep patterns of 3 contemporary hunter-gatherer societies, the Hadza, the Dotcong-San, and the Tsimane of Bolivia. What they found unsettled a lot of assumptions. These groups did not go to sleep at sunset and wake at sunrise in one long continuous block. They typically stayed up 1 to 3 hours after dark talking, sitting around fire, then slept, then woke before sunrise. And many took a midday rest, a short pause in the heat of the afternoon that mirrors the napping rhythms your own body still quietly requests every day around 2 p.m. The fire was not incidental. The fire changed everything. Around the fire, the conversation shifted. Anthropologist Wiessner analyzed over 170 conversations among the Dotcong-San, systematically comparing what people talked about during the day versus what they talked about at night. Daytime conversation was largely practical complaints, social logistics, information about food and people. But nighttime conversation, by firelight, was dominated by storytelling, narrative, memory, imagination. The transmission of cultural knowledge through story, who the group was, where they came from, what the world meant happened at night, by fire, for hundreds of thousands of years before anyone wrote anything down. Every story you have ever been told is a descendant of those conversations. Every book that has ever kept you up too late. Every show you promised yourself you'd stop watching after one more episode. Every story that made you cry without knowing quite why. All of it traces back to a circle of people in the dark, faces lit orange by fire, passing meaning from one generation to the next in the only way they knew how. You are still sitting around that fire. Your need for story is not entertainment. It is not a weakness or an indulgence. It is biological. It is what your brain does when the practical business of the day is finished and the darkness arrives around the edges. It is ancient infrastructure, still running. This is where something closes that you may not have felt open. You started your day with a to-do list, with tasks and obligations and the low background pressure of modern existence. And somewhere in the back of your nervous system, something far older than language kept sending signals that didn't quite fit a craving for long unstructured time, for conversation that matters, for rest without guilt, for the feeling of sitting close to people with nothing urgent left to do, for a story that reaches into you and holds something true. That feeling is not a productivity failure. That feeling is not laziness dressed up in modern language. That feeling is 300,000 years of human life encoded in the structure of what you are, telling you what a day is actually supposed to feel like. You have a to-do list. And your ancestors, every one of them, had something else entirely. They had time. They had each other. And in the long hours before civilization decided that was not enough, that was more than enough.